We're live from New Delhi. You're watching India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, coming up in the next 30 minutes. India's External Affairs Minister to co-chair the 10th India-Republic of Korea Joint Commission meeting met South Korea's Director of National Security Chang Ho-in in Seoul. U.S. Supreme Court unanimously restores Donald Trump to the Colorado primary ballot. Trump calls for presidential immunity. Americans set to vote simultaneously on biggest day on election calendar, Super Tuesday. 15 U.S. states and 1 territory to witnessing polling. And France becomes world's first country to make abortion a constitutional right. Can take place until 14 weeks after conception now. And on to the top story. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has arrived in South Korea, beginning the day with meeting Director of the National Security Chang Ho-jin in Seoul. The two leaders held a useful discussion on shared convergences in the Indo-Pacific and contemporary regional and global issues. Dr. Jaishankar will co-chair the 10th India-South Korea Joint Commission meeting with his counterpart Cho Tae-yul. Also, Dr. S. Jaishankar met top leaders during his visit to South Korea on Tuesday. Jaishankar met South Korea's Trade, Industry and Energy Minister Han Dok-gyeon in Seoul. The two leaders held a wide-ranging conversation on trade and economic cooperation set at the heart of the India-South Korea relationship. Also, Dr. S. Jaishankar held discussions with the think tank representatives of the Republic of Korea, highlighting increased exchanges as convergences between the two countries continue to grow. Well, in the second leg of his visit, Dr. Jaishankar would be in Japan, where he will participate in the 16th India-Japan Foreign Ministers' Strategic Dialogue with Japanese counterpart Yoko Kamikawa. The two ministers are expected to discuss issues of bilateral, regional and global importance and exchange views on cooperation for a free, open, inclusive, peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Dr. Jaishankar will also participate in the first Senior Roundtable at Tokyo. The roundtable is a key step towards enhancing Track 2 exchanges between India and Japan. He is expected to interact with business leaders, think tanks and academia, building upon strong cultural and people-to-people ties. And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the developmental projects worth more than 7,200 crore rupees in Indian state of Telangana today. The projects cater to sectors like roads, rail, petroleum and natural gas. He also dedicated to the nation the Civil Aviation Research Organization Centre, or CARO, in Hyderabad state. CARO will leverage the boundless skills, talent and passion of the Telangana youth and give India's civil aviation industry global recognition. Prime Minister also dedicated Civil Aviation Research Organization Centre to the nation in Hyderabad. Airport Authority of India has established it at Begumpet Airport, Hyderabad, to further enhance research and development activities in the civil aviation sector. Also, during his visit in the southern state, the Indian Prime Minister Modi offered prayers at Sri Ujjayani Mahakali Temple in Sikandrabad city. The temple is believed to be 191 years old. Prime Minister Modi wished for the prosperity of the countrymen in the temple of Mahakali. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also flagged off the first multimodal transport system train service between Ghatkesar, Ligampalli and Maula Ali, Sanat Nagar. The long-awaited train service extends the popular suburban train services in the Hyderabad-Sikandrabad twin-city regions to new areas for the first time like Cherlapalli, Maula Ali. And moving on, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that states cannot exclude Donald Trump from voting ballots. The former president has thanked the court for ruling in his favor, calling the judgment a big win for America. It comes after a court in the state of Colorado ruled Trump should be disqualified from re-election as the Jan 6th attack on the Capitol building amounted to insurrection. Nick Harper reports for more from Washington.
This court took up the case after Colorado ruled that Trump's name would not appear when voters cast their ballots on Super Tuesday. A court in the state said last year that the former president was constitutionally unfit to hold office again. The Colorado judges relied on the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which says a person should be barred from office if they've been involved in insurrection. And Colorado took the opinion that the January 6th Capitol attack should be classified as such. However, the 9 Supreme Court justices viewed it very differently. In a unanimous ruling, they said that states may disqualify a person from holding state office, but have no power to prevent a person holding federal office, especially the presidency. The former president reacted on social media, writing in capital letters, "Big win for America." He also spoke at his Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida.
The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well. And another thing that will be coming up very soon will be immunity for a president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president, because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision.
He'd earlier predicted that a ruling against him would bring chaos and bedlam to the United States. Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold said the state should be able to bar oath-breaking insurrectionists from the ballot. The Supreme Court's decision is being seen as the most consequential since the 2000 election, when it essentially handed the presidency to George W. Bush by ordering the vote recount in Florida to stop, denying Al Gore. The court's judgment also overturns similar ballot bans on Trump in the states of Maine and Illinois, and on challenges in a further 14 states, which are still pending. Trump remains the likely candidate to become the Republican Party nominee to challenge Democrat Joe Biden for the White House in November's presidential election. Nick Harper in Washington, reporting for DD India.
Well, millions of Americans are heading to the polls today in more than a dozen states to vote for their preferred presidential candidate. Super Tuesday, as it's known, is a defining moment in the campaign, and this time it could make Donald Trump the presumptive Republican Party nominee to take on Joe Biden again for the White House, as Benji Hire explains.
Well, it's upon us, the biggest day of this year's primary battle, one that could ultimately decide the candidates for the presidency. Donald Trump leads that race for the Republicans. The former president, vying for the Oval Office for the third time, is in pole position. On a rocket, he says, to clinch the nomination, having won all but one of the contests in past weeks. And on Tuesday, Super Tuesday, he's the favourite to take all 15 states, leaving his rival for the nomination, Nikki Haley, with a potentially irrecoverable deficit. The former South Carolina governor and former US ambassador to the United Nations is vowing to stay in the running for now. Mr. Trump was given a major boost this week after the Supreme Court here in Washington ruled he can remain on the ballot. Some states have tried to get him barred for inciting an insurrection following the 2020 election, which he lost. He faces multiple criminal trials related to those efforts to overturn that election and his alleged mishandling of classified documents, having pleaded not guilty to those charges. Despite vocal opposition from his own Democrat Party base, incumbent Joe Biden, the current resident of the building behind me, is set to win his primary votes. Polls show, I should say, a November face-off between him and Trump would be very tight. In Washington, Benji Hire for DD India.
Well, France has become the first country to enshrine the right to access abortion services into its constitution. Lawmakers and senators overwhelmingly approved the changes in a rare joint session of parliament at the Chateau of Versailles. The time limit has since been extended to 14 weeks, with the cost of the procedure covered by the National Health Insurance System. DD India's correspondent Ross Cullen reports for more.
The Congress has adopted the constitutional bill on the freedom to have access to abortion, as approved by the 3/5 majority of votes cast.
Majorité requise pour l'adoption du...
Well, the historic vote took place on Monday at the Chateau of Versailles. It was a joint session of Parliament, which is a pretty rare event. MPs and senators coming together to vote, more than 900 parliamentarians in the famous former royal palace, voting on whether or not they wanted to enshrine the right to access an abortion into the French constitution. And this policy had easily passed the lower house in January, it passed the upper house in February. This was the final parliamentary hurdle and it cleared it with an overwhelming majority, 780 MPs and senators combined voting in favour and just 72 against.
Nous pouvons changer le cours de l'histoire.
Women's body are nothing but an empire of their freedom and their free will. And ladies and gentlemen, not a tool for a project that is not their own.
Léguée, celle d'appartenir à un peuple.
Notre constitution n'est pas seulement la base de notre ordre juridique.
Our constitution is not only the basis of our judicial order. It is a foundation of our republic, the reflection of our values, and so the freedom to have access to abortion has its place in it, and the world guaranteed ensure that it will never be put into question. Not the facts, not as a law, not today, not tomorrow, not by anyone, never.
Par quiconque.
Abortion has been legal in France since 1975, and some on the right said there's no immediate legal or judicial threat to the right to access pregnancy termination services. But lawmakers in the left and centre looked at what happened in 2022 in the United States when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which overturned the constitutional right to access abortion services. And they said we can't risk that happening here in France. We want to go further than just having abortion as legal. We want abortion access to be constitutionally protected. The next stage and the final stage will be President Emmanuel Macron on Friday carrying out the official signing ceremony. It will be March the 8th, and that is no accidental date. That will be this year's International Women's Day. Ross Cullen in Versailles reporting for DD India.
And meanwhile, abortion rights activists gathered in central Paris cheered and applauded as the Eiffel Tower sparkled in the background and displayed the message, "My body, my choice," after French lawmakers voted to inscribe abortion in its constitution. After the vote, the results were shown on a giant screen in front of the Eiffel Tower. Women's rights activists and supporters of the bill cheered and danced while Beyoncé's Girls blasted in the background. And moving on, Israel's military said the United Nations aid agency UNRWA in Gaza employed over 450 military operatives from Hamas and other armed groups on Monday. Israeli Army spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said Israel has shared this intelligence with the United Nations.
Over 450 UNRWA employees are military operatives in terror groups in Gaza. Over 450. This is no mere coincidence. This is systematic. Donations that are meant for humanitarian purposes, meant to benefit the people of Gaza, are funding mass murderers and rapists. We send the information that I'm sharing now, as well as further intelligence, to our international partners, including the UN.
And U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris on Monday urged Israel to craft a credible humanitarian plan before conducting major military activities in Rafah. She said during a meeting with Israeli War Cabinet member Benny Gantz, she also pressed Israel to take more measures to get aid into Gaza. Israel last month intensified its bombardment of Rafah in Gaza's south. Gantz, a political rival to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is expected to meet U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday. And now a quick update on truce talks. Hamas and Egyptian mediators said on Monday they were going ahead with talks in Cairo on securing a ceasefire in Gaza. The talks, which began on Sunday, continued for the second day despite Israel's decision not to send a delegation. However, according to sources, mediators were in touch with the Israelis, allowing negotiations to continue despite their absence. All related sides hopes to secure the first extended ceasefire of the 5-month-old war in time of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan, which begins on Sunday. Meanwhile, the Israeli army released aerial footage of its military strikes targeting southern Lebanon. Some of the Israeli targets were hit in response to rockets intercepting over the border area on Monday morning, fueling fears of a bigger confrontation. And Houthi rebels are trying to escalate the conflict in Gulf of Aden with their recent decision. Houthi minister on Monday said that ships will have to obtain a permit from Yemen's Houthi-controlled Maritime Affairs Authority before entering Yemeni waters. Houthi rebels have repeatedly launched drones and missiles against international commercial shipping in the Gulf of Aden since mid-November. And India has strongly condemned the humanitarian crisis that has deepened due to ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly briefing on Gaza crisis, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj, reiterated India is committed to supporting a two-state solution. She also urged to scale up the humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza immediately.
India has a long-standing and uncompromising position against terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. There can be no justification for terrorism and hostage-taking. As such, we demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It is imperative that humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza be scaled up immediately in order to avert a further deterioration in the situation. We urge all parties to come together in this endeavor. India has provided humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine and will continue to do so. India is committed to support a two-state solution where the Palestinian people are able to live freely in an independent country within secure borders with due regard to the security needs of Israel.
Well, an Indian national was killed and another two were injured on Monday when an anti-tank missile fired from Lebanon struck an orchard near Israel's northern border community of Margaliot. Embassy of Israel in India in a tweet has expressed shock over the incident. It said, and I quote, "The agriculture workers were cultivating an orchard at the northern village of Margaliot on Monday. Israeli medical institutions are completely at the service of the injured who are being treated by their very best medical staff." And still to come on this edition of DT India Live. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. Stay with us to know more. North Korea's defense ministry urges South Korea and the United States to stop military drills. And for the first time ever, India's women's and men's table tennis teams qualify for the Olympics through the World Team Rankings.
India that invents. India that innovates. India that excites. India that invites. Land of possibility. Teeming with opportunities. Watch India Ideas each Thursday 8 p.m. only on DT India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Live. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, and moving on, Haiti's neighbors on Monday began shoring up their defenses and recalling embassy staff as a gang conflict in the Caribbean nation escalated and thousands fled fresh fighting. On Sunday, Haiti's government declared a state of emergency and imposed nightly curfews after armed men busted thousands from prison and a gang leader called for the ousting of Prime Minister Ariel Henry. The Dominican Republic said on Monday that its defense minister was touring the border to supervise progress on a border fence, while the president ruled out opening refugee camps for Haitians in the country. U.S. urged its citizens to leave Haiti as soon as possible. Brazil's government called on the international community to implement the UN's resolution to send a multinational force to Haiti. Neighboring Bahamas said it had called embassy staff back to New Providence, while Mexico said its nationals should limit themselves to essential transit and stock up on water, fuel and non-perishables. The International Rescue Committee said that 8 groups it works with had been forced to pause their work given the security situation. 8 groups have urged the UN-backed force to prioritize securing routes to provide people with medical care and food. And now updates related to Russia-Ukraine conflict. UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi plans to discuss Russia's plans for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week. In a press conference of a quarterly meeting of his agency's 35-nation board of governors to mark the 2nd anniversary of Russian forces seizing the Zaporizhzhia plant, Grossi said he is due to leave for Russia on Tuesday. Zaporizhzhia, Europe's largest nuclear power plant, has lost its connection to all its external power lines 8 times in the past 18 months. And North Korea's defense ministry urged South Korea and the United States to stop military drills, saying they are rehearsals of war and warning of consequences. Pyongyang strongly denounced the exercise, calling them frantic, reckless military drills and urging them to stop. Also, South Korean and U.S. militaries kicked off their annual spring exercises on Monday with twice the number of troops joining compared to last year. The Freedom Shield exercises, set to end on March 14th, came as North Korea pushes to develop its nuclear capabilities with missile and other weapons tests. And staying with Asia's news, Taiwan's armed forces will increase the number of missile drills they hold this year in response to a change in enemy threat. Defense Minister said this amidst China's ramped-up military pressure to force the island to accept its sovereignty claims. The minister said that unlike past exercises, which were undertaken to limit the impact of aviation and everyday life, current ones aim at boosting training. Also, the Philippines has accused China's Coast Guard of carrying out dangerous maneuvers that led to a collision between its Coast Guard ship and a Chinese vessel during a resupply mission for Philippine troops in the South China Sea. Philippine Coast Guard shared a footage showing its vessel BRP Sindangan colliding with the Chinese Coast Guard ship while escorting a regular resupply mission. A PCG spokesperson said the Filipino ship sustained minor structural damage in the incident, while China's Coast Guard said on Tuesday that it took control measures against Philippine vessels that illegally intruded into waters adjacent to the Second Thomas Shoal, which is a disputed atoll in the South China Sea. And Southeast Asian leaders are meeting in Australia for a rare summit. The ASEAN-Australia Special Summit in Melbourne will mark 50 years since Australia became the first official partner of the ASEAN bloc now. Prime Minister of Thailand, Srettha Thavisin, Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, and the Prime Minister of Vietnam, Pham Minh Chinh, arrived in Melbourne ahead of the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit. Indonesian leader Joko Widodo also arrived in Australia to attend the summit. Also, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese also held meetings with Association of ASEAN Secretary-General Kau Kim Hoorn and Thailand's Prime Minister on the sidelines of the summit. The summit is expected to discuss deepening joint efforts to reduce carbon emissions in the region. Security in the Asia-Pacific region is also on the summit agenda. All right, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated Shehbaz Sharif on being sworn in as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Shehbaz was administered oath as Pakistan's 24th Prime Minister by President Arif Alvi on Monday. This is the second time that he has taken oath as Pakistan's PM after 2022. And now let's take a look at other stories making news today. India's National Investigation Agency on Tuesday conducted search operations at 17 places across 7 states in connection with its ongoing probe into the Bengaluru prison radicalization case. The raids are underway in Bengaluru and Tamil Nadu, among other states. The Ambala-Chandigarh National Highway in the northern Indian state of Haryana has opened after 22 days. The lifting of barricades has brought relief to common people. Barricades had been placed when protesting farmers held demonstrations at the site last month. Indian Union Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia inaugurated India's first green hydrogen plant in the stainless steel sector in Haryana on Monday. The project aims to reduce carbon emissions by 2,700 million tons per annum and 54,000 tons of CO2 emissions over a period of 20 years. This is a significant step towards achieving India's net zero targets. Indian Union Minister Dharmendra Pradhan inaugurated a Skill India Centre in the eastern state of Odisha in Angol on Monday. The project will equip the youth with employability and new age skills and open their avenues for employment in domestic and global markets. And moving on, the Indian men's and women's table tennis teams made history on Monday as both the teams qualified for the Olympics for the first ever time on the basis of world rankings, despite losing their quarter-final games at ITTF World Table Tennis Team Championships that was held in Busan. Both the men and women teams have secured their spots for the 2024 Paris Olympics. This will be for the first time that India competes in the table tennis team event at the Olympics since its inception at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And northern lights turned the dark sky of China's northernmost province into red and green. The dancing ribbons of aurora lights and dazzling stars lit up the sky. Lucky tourists and shutterbugs captured the views on camera. The northern lights, also known as aurora borealis, is usually produced by geomagnetic storms visible in middle and high latitudes of the northern hemisphere. All right, that's all for this edition of DD India Live, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Lipakshi Kurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live.